drop off, or if you want to send it to a friend or something, you're welcome to do so. I'll send out the link after the webinar. So thank you for joining us, everyone. A little bit of housekeeping. I do have everyone muted just for ease of access. You never know who's going to pop up. But feel free to type questions in the chat. We will get to them kind of at the end, but you can always type them throughout, or just, communicate with one another. So my name is Emily Silence. I am the Development Associate at Potomac Riverkeeper Network. And if you aren't as familiar with us, Potomac Riverkeeper Network works to protect and safeguard the rivers, our Potomac and Shenandoah rivers, and all the kind of tributaries that are in the Potomac watershed. So we do this kind of through our riverkeepers. So if you aren't familiar with the waterkeeper movement, it is a global movement. There are riverkeepers on most major US rivers and some internationally as well too. And riverkeepers are kind of the eyes and ears of the waterways. They're ones that are monitoring. They're the ones that are actually going out there by boat, plane, drone, you name it. I apologize if you hear my cat in the background. Anyway, so we have 3 riverkeepers. We're a network of 3 riverkeepers. Dean is our Potomac riverkeeper. He works from the Chesapeake Bay up to Harper's Ferry. We have an upper Potomac riverkeeper, Brent, who works from Harper's Ferry to the headwaters. And our Shenandoah riverkeeper, Mark, works on the Shenandoah part of the watershed. And they use advocacy and enforcement essentially to protect their rivers. So advocacy, we advocate for the river. We do programs that benefit the waterways, water quality monitoring, put in mussels in the river, that kind of thing. And then we do enforcement work as well too. So bringing cases against polluters. And that's kind of what we're here to talk about today. So I will let Dean and Phillip go ahead and get started. Again, Dean is our Potomac riverkeeper. He's been here for us quite a while. He has pretty extensive background in legal work and being a riverkeeper. And Phillip is our Vice President of Litigation and programs. So he is our kind of in-house lawyer who has been working with us for quite a while as well, and has worked on Hudson Riverkeeper too. So has a very extensive knowledge of legal work. And with that, I will let them get started.
Hey everybody, Dean Alex here, your Potomac Riverkeeper. Thanks for coming today. Emily, go feed that cat. But I appreciate y'all joining us for Water Wednesday, and we're just going to talk about the work riverkeepers do, building a case. Obviously, Emily kind of touched on some of it, but we have 3 riverkeepers: the Shenandoah Riverkeeper, Upper Potomac, that we cover 14,700 square miles of watershed. So it's a lot to cover. We're all working on totally different issues, but any threats to water quality, you can bet we're our job is to protect and defend the Potomac and Shenandoah River. And we do, frequent patrols. We conduct permit reviews. Philip's going to talk about some of that. Really just investigating sources of pollution. We do our own investigations. We do what's called compliance sweeps, looking at all the discharge permits throughout the whole river basin. There's thousands of them, non-compliant permits where they're breaking the law, violating the Clean Water Act. And Philip works with dozens of attorneys, leveraging over roughly $2 million a year in pro bono legal service. And under the Clean Water Act, citizens are allowed to enforce compliance to eliminate sources of pollution that are negatively impacting water quality. And we've done this for years. This organization's been around for 20 years. I've been a riverkeeper for about 20 years. And, we do this, as Emily mentioned, through like river patrols. We have volunteer pilots. Alan is on our staff as a professional photographer. We use drones. Brent Walls is our Upper Potomac. He trains dozens of waterkeepers how to use drones for investigations. So we use all these tools, to go out and find these sources of pollution, work to eliminate them. When I first started 20 years ago, my mentor was Rick Dove. He was a former Marine judge, a JAG. And he taught me at very, right when I started that, you need to document things in a way that as if you're always going to go to trial. Very careful in terms of documenting sources of pollution, right? And so providing compelling visual evidence, right? Very, very important part of what we do. Sampling data, if we can, from public access, like a waterway or a roadway, we don't trespass. Could jeopardize the case if we ever go to trial. And really the two main things are, just for ease of purpose, and Philip will get in more details, but it needs to be an ongoing source of pollution, and that the regulatory agencies are basically failing to enforce compliance. And believe it or not, there's a lot of that out there with old sewage plants, a bunch of things. But making sure that you're actually out there documenting things properly, as if you are always going to go to trial. And so, doing proper chain of custody, using EPA or state certified labs, great documentation. Even things as little as you don't want a picture of you smiling with your thumbs up in front of a pollution source, right? That could be found in discovery and used as evidence against you, right? So things like that. These pictures right here are just some of the images. One was taken by Alan. And this was used to strengthen a permit to eliminate selenium and arsenic and mercury from the Morgantown and the Dickerson coal-fired power plant on the Potomac River. This other one was a toxic seep that I took right off the Possum Point Road, proving, and we also did the sediment analysis from the waterway. We couldn't access this, but we use these in different ways. We didn't go to trial with either one of these, but we use these, one to strengthen a permit, the other to get legislation passed in 2019 to clean up 28 million tons of coal ash. And so that's why making sure you're doing the proper legwork and proper documentation is really important. So when I first started here at Potomac Riverkeeper Network in 2015, one of the first things I was asked to go look at was the combined sewer system of Alexandria, that there was problems with outfall 01 that was not being considered as part of a plan for eliminating their combined sewer discharge river, that they were going to allow this to be an ongoing. So I was walking around with Nick Kuttner, our board chair at the time, and this is where the Orinoco CSO outfall is, up on the top arrow. We accidentally stumbled on to the end of Orinoco Street and came across this discharge pipe that discharges right into the Potomac River on the other side of the Robinson Terminal North Pier, right in Old Town. And this is basically what we saw. To the left is Robinson Terminal North Pier. You can see the contaminated sediments. The booms were falling apart. And basically every day the tide changes every 6 hours. It was like a battering ram of logs just moving these booms around. And then you could see the oil discharges plainly visible. I was kind of surprised, that this was happening. We didn't know much about it at the time, but I could tell obviously there was a problem. There was a little sign up there about the city. Oh, just contact the city. We're working on this. Please let us know if you have any concerns. But one thing that was very obvious was that the booms weren't working. They weren't containing the oil from getting out into the river. They were crossing under, over, through the boom. And so obviously that was a concern to us. And as we met with the city, we later learned that these are polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, PAHs. This is naphthalene and coal tar, creosote. There's a host of PAHs, and they're dangerous. They're carcinogenic. They can cause cancer. It's a public health concern, particularly if people are eating fish that are ingesting these contaminants. So we had real concerns about this. And at the end of the day, really the city did not have a permit to discharge this into the Potomac River, and it's been going on for decades. And so these are just some of the pictures as we started to investigate this, both meeting with the city, their own documentation, and we started doing our own investigation, looking at, the main flow coming out of the pipe. There was some leakage coming out of the sidewall of the pipe. And there was obviously some contamination concerns under the pier. The city had already identified that there was contamination directly in front of the pipe. I mean, that was plainly visible from the picture I showed, but there was also a lot of contamination under the pier. We did our own sampling, and we found contamination, widespread under the pier and further out than we felt like the city was going to address. The city was already thinking about and working toward doing some dredging, but this is just a little analysis one of our consultants did. But the bottom line is that, these PAHs, were definitely a cause of concern, and that this was this flow coming out of the pipe was exceeding, cleanup requirements that we felt definitely needed to happen. And so these are some of the key findings, but basically the PAHs underneath the pier matched that of the sheens from the outfall. We felt like the PAHs and the sediments were at levels that required cleanup, and that the extent of the contamination, as I said, is greater than the size of the city wanted to clean up. And that the contamination from the gas works was going to continue to contaminate the river. That was a really big deal for us. One, it was an ongoing source of pollution, which, as I mentioned, was a real important thing toward moving toward litigation, or an enforcement action. But really, one of the things that really triggered us was that Alexandria was moving forward with a dredge project. They weren't going to address all the contamination, and we were really concerned that they were going to recontaminate the site because they were not eliminating the source of pollution from the gasworks site, right? So that's what kind of prompted this, and we've moved forward. We've had multiple discussions with the city, but at this point, I'm gonna let Philip take over and kind of talk about some of the legal findings and our work with our lawyers in the city. So let me take this. There you go.
Thanks, Dean. All right, I'm just gonna bring up my slide here. All right, can you all see that? Great, excellent. So good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. Dean did a fantastic job, kind of talking about what he does as a riverkeeper, how we work together. And so, we've got a great team here at Potomac Riverkeeper Network because we have Dean and the two other riverkeepers that are out talking to the public, investigating pollution, doing all the work that Dean just described. And then when they find an issue that looks like it could be resolved or could be addressed through legal action, then they bring me in, I get involved, we work out a case strategy. So I'm going to kind of shift gears a little bit, cover some of the same ground that Dean talked about, and then give you a little more detail about kind of some of the mechanics of how we put a case together, how we use outside counsel, things like that. So just a kind of an overview of our enforcement work. Again, Dean mentioned some of this already. The riverkeepers do their patrols. We also fairly often get tips from when I say watchdogs, that means folks who are members of ours, supporters of ours, that are out on the water or out in their neighborhood, and they see something suspicious and they contact us. One great example is there was a fishing guide on the Upper Potomac in Western Maryland who notified our Upper Potomac Riverkeeper because he saw some black, oily, sludgy material leaking into the river from near a paper mill in Western Port, Maryland. Turned out the paper mill was leaking a toxic black liquor substance into the river from their mill operations. So that led to a lawsuit and a settlement agreement, and they're cleaning all that up now. So we really have lots of ways of finding information. Dean also mentioned the aerial patrols, the drones. We have now drones working with each, being used as a tool with each riverkeeper to investigate from the air. We also do, not quite as fun as drones, but we do every year, we look at an EPA database that has a huge amount of data about what facilities that are in our watershed have Clean Water Act discharge permits and whether they are meeting those permit limits. And so Clean Water Act will issue permits to typically things like power plants, wastewater treatment plants, things like that, facilities that use water and discharge water that's been treated, ideally treated properly, back into our rivers. And so we look at those databases and often find evidence of polluters violating their permits, and we use that to drive our investigations as well. And in terms of how we work our litigation, we have a really cost-effective, great model at Potomac Riverkeeper Network where we have one in-house counsel, myself, and we've established relationships with a whole wide range of outside counsel that will represent us in litigation pro bono, so for free, essentially. And we've done that. That was done at the very beginning by our founder back 20 years ago. And we've continued to develop that model. And that enables us to, if we find pollution, we can bring a lot of cases and have a lot of capacity to do legal work, even while we only have a staff of 11 people and one attorney. So Dean mentioned this, but we get about $2 million a year in in-kind contributions, basically pro bono legal support, and which is amazing. That's essentially our entire annual budget that we get in equal amounts in legal work. So and these are not just, you know, volunteer lawyers off the street. These are amazing lawyers. We have the Sidley Austin law firm. We have national kind of environmental groups that represent us, as you'll see, like Earth Justice. And law school clinics often take smaller cases for us, so it's a great way to teach future environmental lawyers about this work and get them excited about the work. And then we have local counsel. We have an amazing local counsel, a lawyer in West Virginia, who works as our kind of local representative on cases, has been doing that for years for free. And so we really, you know, we couldn't have the success we've had without that arrangement. And just to talk a little bit about, you know, what is when we're filing a lawsuit, you know, oftentimes people who aren't in the middle of litigation, doing litigation a lot, you know, it seems like sometimes an extreme step to take. And we really do it carefully. We have a strategy. We look at what the factors, the pros and cons of filing a lawsuit. And you know, I think it's good to think about what our goals are. And our primary goal always when we take legal action is to stop the pollution, right? That's probably obvious or self-evident, but you know, it's not to glorify ourselves or promote ourselves as, you know, aggressive kind of law enforcers. That ends up being a result of it. Sometimes we have that reputation, but our goal is to stop the pollution. Our goal is to force the polluter to clean up the mess they've made, right? So if it's an industrial site, like the paper mill I mentioned, like the Alexandria site where they have this historic pollution that they've never dealt with, they need to clean that up. And, you know, if it's a sewage treatment plant that's dumping untreated sewage or poorly treated sewage into the river, they have to fix their systems. They've got to do better, and they've got to clean up their act, no pun intended. And then just, you know, and some other factors. With very large cases in the past, we've been lucky in getting a court settlement agreement and a cleanup agreement where instead of paying a large penalty to the federal government, which kind of goes into the federal government budget, you know, it doesn't really go directly back to the pollution or back to our community. Polluting companies are often interested in doing what are called environmental projects, where they provide funding to actually pay for projects to help kind of compensate a community that's been affected by their pollution. So one example is a few years ago, we settled with several power plants on the lower Potomac, and part of the settlement was $500,000 for the Potomac River to help oyster restoration projects on the lower Potomac. And so that's one simple example of where you can, you know, instead of the money and the cost of that compliance going back out of our watershed, we keep it in our watershed and we improve our environment. Keep going. Oops. Hang on, just having some trouble with my slides. Hang on, not sure why. Sorry, folks, give me a second here. I don't know why oh, there we go. Okay, whoops. All right, 1 second, go back. Now it's working. Okay, thank you. Just a few more slides and then I'll look forward to talking to you. So, so just to, again, break down kind of how we work the facts and the law. Any good strong case that you bring to court, you have to have good facts, and ideally you have good law. Sometimes you have one or the other. In this case, when we're talking about the Alexandria coal tar pollution that Dean was just introducing to you, you know, we have really clear facts. We know that toxic coal tar is discharging and continues to leak into the river from the stormwater pipe and from the shoreline. We know that those discharges are contaminating the sediment in the riverbed. And we know that these coal tar toxins, these PAHs, are very toxic. They're a known pollutant. You should never, essentially, the government should never allow any kind of oil discharge into a waterway. That's strictly prohibited. So we know this is illegal. And we know that Alexandria, despite trying to work on this for over 40 years now, it just has completely failed to fix this problem. So when we take those facts and we look at the laws that we use, there are a couple laws that we filed our lawsuit under. The Clean Water Act is our bedrock environmental law that we use. As Dean mentioned, that law and also the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, both these federal laws allow citizens to bring lawsuits against polluters when we find pollution and when we find that the government is not taking steps to address this. And so the lawsuit that we filed includes legal claims under the Clean Water Act. Essentially, these discharges of oil are not covered by a permit. They're not in a permit. They're not allowed in any kind of official way, and so they're illegal if there's no permit allowing them. And under the Resource Conservation Recovery Act, which is essentially the federal law that covers hazardous waste and toxic waste discharges and disposal, the contamination of the riverbed from all of these oil discharges over the past 40 years, that is, in the language of the statute, that is an imminent and substantial endangerment to the environment, which basically means it's contaminating the environment. It may be a public health concern, and it has to be addressed by the polluter. So, and then, how do we find counsel? Again, as I mentioned earlier, we have great relationships with all different kinds of counsel. Sidley Austin, which has been a law firm working with us for many, many years, are fantastic because in addition to providing free legal services, they will often arrange to have technical consultants and expert witnesses also work with us on our case that provide invaluable support to our case. You can't bring a complicated environmental case unless you have good experts. And SS Papadopoulos and Associates, SSPA, are the consultants we work with on this case in Alexandria, on many other cases. They're top-notch geochemists, hydrologists, really, really fantastic support. So they're supporting us on this case. And we've got a strong case, as I'll talk about in a minute. We hope Alexandria comes to their senses and sits down with us and works out an arrangement to deal with this pollution once and for all. One other thing I wanted to mention, in thinking about when you litigate and when you're deciding to bring a case, we look at some factors that I think you'll find interesting. And one is, of course, an obvious one is, does this fit within our mission? Our mission is to protect and restore the Potomac and the Shenandoah rivers, to protect public access to the river. That includes the surface water, that includes drinking water issues because we get our drinking water from the Potomac in this region. And also, it's just, so we're not going to file cases about land use unless it affects the river. We're not going to file cases about air pollution, things like that. So, we focus on water. We bring cases that are directly advancing our mission. We also think about whether the case is necessary. Is there another way we could solve this problem without resorting to litigation? And in the Alexandria case, as I think Dean talked about, we've been trying to work with Alexandria for over 6 years, cooperatively, collaboratively, without filing a lawsuit. And we hit a dead end. We just weren't making progress. And so we decided to bring a suit. We obviously try to bring a strong case, make sure it's winnable. We make sure we can bring the case properly. And we want to make sure the legal remedy, if we win in court, is the judge going to be able to require? So again, those are kind of obvious. This is all kind of going into the thought process and the strategy we have when we bring a case. And I thought this picture was funny because you want to make sure you don't hire Joe Pesci as your environmental lawyer, because he managed to get his nephew off the bank robbery charge, but you don't want to get him on a Clean Water Act case. So moving on, a lot of text here. I just want to run through this very quickly, just to give you some background on the Alexandria coal tar issue. Again, Alexandria Gas Company and then the city operated this manufactured gas plant on basically at that area of Orinoco Street in Old Town from the mid 1800s to the mid 1900s. That type of operation results in a lot of waste product, which is this toxic coal tar that we're talking about. Of course, back in the 1800s and early 1900s, there was not good disposal of this. And so it ended up leaking into the ground, leaking into the river for a very long time. In 1975, the city put in this stormwater pipe that we've been talking about under Orinoco Street that was meant to carry stormwater off the streets and into the river. Unfortunately, that created a pathway, a perfect kind of conveyance to bring that coal tar plume, this sludgy coal tar material, gave it a very easy way to go right to the river as well. The city has tried to take steps over the past 40 years to resolve this. They put the booms in, which they haven't really maintained well. They continue to have problems with that. They also applied for state permission in Virginia to go under what's called the Voluntary Remediation Program in Virginia, which is intended to be an alternative to going through litigation, going through a whole, legal process for doing a cleanup. And the state of Virginia allowed that, but unfortunately, Virginia, the regulatory agency, Department of Environmental Quality, has never really paid attention to what the city is doing and not really taking action and pushing the city to do more. They kind of stood by and let this go on for a very long time. We started our investigation in around 2016, 2017. The city did do a dredging project in 2018. They removed a lot of contaminated sediment from in front of the pipe, from the riverbed in the area of the pipe. But as Dean said, this only is a good remedy if you've already stopped the discharges from the shore, right? So just like anything, if you clean up an area, but you still got pollution leaking into it, you're not really cleaning it up. You're just creating more problems for yourself down the road. And we're already concerned that this area has already been recontaminated in the river by this pollution. And then that led eventually to us in 2019 filing a notice of intent to sue, and then filing the case we brought in May of this year. Just very briefly, what happens next? We've got our case filed. The city kind of responded very simply. Not a lot of action in the case yet. We're in the process where we're deciding. We're working out arrangements to exchange documents, which is called discovery in a legal case. It's essentially kind of an open process. So, we share with them the records and the science and the data that we're relying on in our case, and they do the same with us. That's usually a pretty straightforward process. Hopefully this leads to us, again, sitting down with the city and having settlement negotiations and working this out. And the point of this litigation was to force the city to come to an agreement and to have an enforceable schedule, an actual schedule that we could hold them to take action, to invest in cleaning up this resource, cleaning up this pollution, and restoring this park. Because Founders Park it's a beautiful area of the city and the waterfront. We shouldn't have an area of a waterfront park in 2022 along the Potomac that has oil just openly leaking into the river from a waterfront. It just shouldn't be happening. So, we're putting public pressure on Alexandria to fix this. Dean, I think he's going to talk about he's doing a tour of the site, public tour of the site tomorrow evening. We encourage you to come to that. And there's some other ways that we can get you involved. So just a few ideas how to get involved. Dean, do you want to take over and talk about these, or do you want me to? I forget.
Yeah, I've been seeing some of the questions pop up. So yeah, we have an alert right now that will be sent out to everybody who's on this to contact Mayor Wilson and ask him to, fix this problem, come to a settlement agreement. We've sent in a settlement agreement. We've sent in a settlement offer, basically. We're waiting to hear back. We don't think this needs to go to trial. I personally don't. I don't think it's going to. I mean, the city said they were going to fix this literally 6-7 years ago. They pledged to Virginia DEQ back in 2000 that they were going to fix this. So it's time for them to fix this. So anything you can do to call or email Mayor Wilson, get any of your friends that live in Alexandria, really, really important. And then we are doing like a a tour tomorrow at 6 p.m. if you'd like to come, just to see. You know, we just want to show people. I'm a strong believer after 20 years of doing this work that, you know, when you do sue a polluter, it's important for us as river keepers to get out and explain to the public why we're doing this, right? Like what we're doing right now. You know, we did not want this to happen. The city asked us 6 years ago if we could keep this private. Those oil sheens were very visible. We could have gotten lots of media attention on it right away. We did not. We worked with them for 6 years in a very frustrating manner. And, you know, we still have not resolved this issue. And we just felt like it was time to move on. So come see it. If you're interested, want to see what it looks like firsthand, hear more about it. Please join us at 6 p.m. tomorrow at the end of Orinoco Street. And then obviously we'd love for you to be a member if you're not already. Thanks to everybody here that is a member of Potomac Riverkeeper Network. And then, you know, if you're interested in this, we have what's called a rapid response team where we're training citizens how to use our Tier 3 certified lab and go out and do some of the things that riverkeepers do your own investigations, because, you know, I can't be everywhere, you know, and we have a lot of things that we're working on. We need people out in the communities just finding sources of pollution, working to eliminate. We train people how to properly report these things in a timely manner so that they're addressed quickly. So if you want to get involved in that, we have a rapid response training coming up. You'll receive information from Emily as a follow-up from this Zoom call. And then obviously we have trash cleanups. We actually have one right at Orinoco Bay there. We would love for you to come out to some of our river cleanups. We have some great paddle events left this summer. If you want to come out and see parts of the river you've never seen, we have some amazing trips. We'd love to get you outside, show you the river, why we love this river. We do everything we can really to connect people to this river and show them why we're fighting every day for clean water. So obviously we'd love to get you involved and come on out. And then I think at this point we may be, I don't know what the next slide is, but I think we'll do Q&A and answer some of the questions y'all might have.
That's right. Yeah, this is pretty much done. I'll just, the next slide just has our contact info, and this will be, Emily's going to share the slides and, you know, a lot of information afterwards. So we could go to Q&A. Let me just, actually, I'll just stop sharing for now. We can go back to that. All right.
All right.
Everyone.
Thanks,
Look
guys.
forward to your questions.
Yeah. All right. There was one question that was submitted beforehand, so I want to ask that before we get to the questions in the chat. What are some ways to track projects that involve 401 or other clean water violations? For example, a legal case and/or permit database that keeps a record of current or past projects involving the Clean Water Act.
It's a great question.
So I mean, I think the Dean, I'll jump in and then.
No, you go ahead. Very technical.
You know, I think the best tool that we have kind of day-to-day to use to track whether these facilities are complying with their permits is what's called the Epa Echo, which is a ECHO, is kind of an acronym. It's their Echo database, and this is a public database. You can, I'll put the link in the chat in a minute for it if people are interested. You know, it's a little technical to get used to using, but you can go to that database. You can search for facilities by usually by geography. So, you know, you could put in Montgomery County, you could put in District of Columbia, and it will show you a map with all the kind of federally permitted facilities in that area. And of course, you're going to find a lot of them. So we often do it, you know, we do a water search for Clean Water Act discharge permits. And then when you click on a facility, it will tell you whether they are complying with our permits or not based on the most recent data. You know, we have a good system. The reason all this data is public is because all facilities that have a Clean Water Act permit to discharge treated water back into the river have to do usually very frequent sampling of their discharge to make sure they're meeting the limits that are in the permit. So the permits will have limits on, you know, how much bacteria they can discharge into the river, how much metals, you know, usually very, very, very low levels of most types of pollution at a level that is not, you know, not dangerous to the environment and to the public. And they have to sample that to make sure they're meeting those limits. And then they have to send that sample report, that data has to be sent to either the federal or state regulator who's in charge of that permit. And all of that's public. And so this EPA database kind of just has all that data on it. And you can just go there and look and see what's happening with a particular facility.
And so they mentioned a 401 permit, which are basically
Okay.
for like future projects that are going to be built to show that there's no adverse water quality impacts from the project. Those are a little bit more challenging. I've had to challenge those permits before and been successful, but that's a little bit more challenging. I mean, Philip can probably talk a little bit more about it, but you need a little bit more resources, I think, to go after a 401 and show that there is going to be harm from the project from just a layman's perspective.
Right. Yeah, you mentioned Clean Water Act 401 certifications. It's another approval that's required that comes from the state. And that typically only applies to federal projects. So something like an interstate gas pipeline or a nuclear power plant or the licensing of a very large dam on a river. Those are kinds of things that require this extra level of permitting. And I'm happy to talk offline if people have more questions about 401. It gets a little wonky and legalistic, but it's an interesting area.
Oh, don't get them started.
I won't. I'll be quiet. So what else do we have?
All right. So what attempts to solve the problem have you seen from Alexandria? So shifting to Alexandria.
Sure. Dean, I can start. You want to jump in, or you?
I mean, just basically, you know, they've made some improvements in terms of like they've spent $10 million or more in consultants. They've caulked the pipe, so they have minimized the amount of oil that's coming out compared to the way it was 5 years ago. So they've definitely made some attempts. I'm not, you know, we've never said that they haven't. But it's just, again, after $10 million in 6 years, there's still oil coming out of the pipe. There's still contaminated sediments under the pier with no time frame in which they're going to clean that up or fix it, which they said they were going to do 6 years ago. So for us, it just was like an ongoing thing that we really felt like we needed an enforceable timeline, because I just feel like they're going to drag this out for another 6 years if we do this. So just from a very basic perspective, I don't know if Phil wants to add more, but.
No, I completely agree. And I mean, I think they have, I again, hate to use a stupid cliche, but I think they've taken like a whack-a-mole approach. I mean, they've kind of, they tried to figure out where the leaks were coming from. A long time ago when they figured out that this stormwater pipe was kind of accelerating this oil pollution of the river, they tried to line the pipe with a kind of a rubbery plastic substance. They thought, okay, well, the metal pipe's corroding, so we'll line it with a substance and the oil won't go anymore. That didn't really work. They tried, they did video inspections of the pipe. They put in some wells that very slowly pump some of this coal tar sludge out of the ground, but it's not enough to actually stop it from continuing to go in the river. So it's been a lot of partial approaches, partial remedies. They did the dredging in the river back in 2018, but again, they did the dredging before they figured out how to stop the leaks. And so it was kind of this, unfortunately, partially wasted effort and wasted money by the city to try and clean up a problem and then allow it to become recontaminated. So, I think they've tried. Something else that's important to mention, I think 3 years ago, they hired a completely new consulting firm. They told us that they were going to start from scratch, get a fresh perspective from the experts on how to clean this up. And that report had a number of alternative approaches, ways to fix the pollution. And the city chose one of the less intensive, less comprehensive approaches. And so, this costs money. These kinds of cleanups are complicated, they're expensive. But the city has had nearly 50 years to fix this, and they have failed to do it. And so that's, they've done some things, but it hasn't worked. So we have to find something that works. It may require, I'm not an expert on this, but what I've seen at similar sites, this may ultimately require that they dig up part of Orinoco Street, that they excavate that entire block area, and they just physically remove a lot of this contamination in the soil and put in clean soil and start over from that. Because as long as you have a plume of coal tar, kind of this pool of coal tar underground and in the groundwater at that site, as long as that's in there, you're not gonna stop this problem. So.
Yeah, and I think the real takeaway message here is that for almost 50 years, they've been discharging without a permit oil to the Potomac River, and it's still not fixed. At some point, you know, what is it going to take to get this problem remedied, you know?
All right. So we did hit this point a little bit, but just if there's anything else you guys want to add, is there anything citizens of Alexandria can do to advocate for resolution, write to a city rep or agency, protest, question mark?
I think Dean talked about a little, quite a bit. We're going to share information afterwards about, how people can get involved. We have an active kind of action going on now to contact the Mayor Justin Wilson. Push them to the table. Tell them to sit down with us and fix this, and be willing to invest the money and the time and the resources to fix this once and for all. Because again, this is a beautiful part of the city's waterfront. There's no reason we should have oil pollution that, you can smell the creosote, you can smell the toxins when you're down there at the park. They've got to do better. So I think coming on the tour that Dean's doing tomorrow night, if you want to learn more, you want to see for yourself, some of these things are, it has a much bigger impact when you're standing on the waterfront looking at this firsthand. So if folks are from Alexandria, from the area, and want to do that, I think that's valuable. You can contact your congressperson, your representative, if you have good lines of communication there. I think Representative Don Beyer is the congressional rep for this area. Contact Beyer's office and say, hey, I've learned about this huge pollution problem. The city hasn't fixed it. What can you do to help us? So lots of ways to get involved.
Next question. Did the Alexandria gas works location, the source of the pollution, not qualify to be an EPA Superfund site? Maybe also just briefly say what a Superfund site is in your explanation.
Okay. Dean, you want me to jump on that one?
Yeah, sure.
Or you want to?
Well, I'll just say, I will say I've seen information that at one point it was listed on the MPL years ago. I don't know how it was removed or taken off the Superfund site, the national priorities list, but at one point it was listed, and it is a serious problem. But anyway, we can talk more about it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think around the time I won't go back to the timeline, but around the time they were, they were being investigated after the stormwater pipe was put in. Once this oil pollution really kind of accelerated, there was a period where the Coast Guard and EPA came out and did inspections and were putting pressure on the city. Like, basically, you've got to figure out a way to fix this. Probably during that time, I think they considered potentially making this a Superfund site. They threatened to enforce against the city, and that's when the city decided to, or made this alternate proposal to go under the state's voluntary program to clean up the site, which again has not turned out well. So, and just to, Emily, thanks for reminding me. If for folks who are not familiar with Superfund, it is it's kind of shorthand for a federal environmental law that is meant to cover very large, very heavily contaminated industrial sites, typically industrial sites, that are very hard to clean up, and that typically have multiple companies or parties that may have contributed to the pollution. So Superfund was a law passed in the 70s around the same time as the Clean Water Act to address this. And so if the state or the federal government, if they decide if EPA typically decides to designate a site, to list a site as a Superfund site on this national priorities list, then it kicks in this whole federal process of identifying who caused the pollution, of forcing them eventually to pay for the cleanup, and then setting up whole citizen boards. It's a very complicated, long process, but it's a good way to deal with sites that, where they don't have good paper trail on who owned the site, who caused the pollution, things like that. So it's it's a famous one. We have several, and when I worked in New York, there were several sites there where there were large areas of the river, of the harbor, that were contaminated back in the 1800s. And so it's often difficult to track those.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I think it used to be a good way to try and clean up sites, but Superfund is large bankrupt now. And so trying to get sites listed on the MPL and push through the Superfund process is a lot harder than it used to be. And so EPA really prioritizes sites. They have to be heavily contaminated, real significant threat to public health, and often with no polluter in sight to help fix it.
Right.
And so it's a real challenge to get sites on the MPL now as compared to, I think, 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, good point.
All right. Does anyone else have any questions? You can always unmute someone. Someone wants to ask a question.
Mark, it looks like Mark has a question.
Yeah.
Mark Collins.
Yeah, I see that.
Okay. I don't know if we want to let him unmute it, but we could, I guess.
Hold on, I was just gonna.
Okay.
Suspenseful, Emily. What's the next question?
I'm sorry, I'm just trying to, actually I'll let people unmute themselves. Where did the option go? There we go.
Oh. Mark, you want to try that? Can you unmute?
All right, you should be able to unmute yourself now.
Oh,
Yeah, there we go.
I forgot what I was going to say, Philip. Sorry. No, I'm just
that was our strategy.
I'm just kidding. I saw that there are just under 30 people on this, and I think that's great. I should probably introduce myself. I'm the former, emphasis on former, director of the Water Enforcement Division at EPA headquarters. And I retired last January, but I think more importantly, I am the current, and have been for a long time, dues-paying member of the Potomac River Keepers Network. And one, I just wanted to say, such excellent work with the city of Alexandria. I just wanted to let everyone know that this represents tremendous amount of work. But the reason I wanted to be unmuted was to really emphasize the importance of citizen involvement in protecting waters and citizen suits. I mean, the Clean Water Act envisions heavy citizen suit involvement. Everyone here qualifies as an independent citizen, attorney general. It's that simple. And don't lose sight of that. I mean, it is so critical. I also happen to know about the budget at EPA, which has been drastically cut for water enforcement, which means the work of citizens is going to be even more important. The last thing I wanted to say too is, and I know Nancy knows this, is if you have a lot of information and you make the decision maybe not to pursue it yourselves, it's really okay to make an appointment with whoever's going to end up with my old job, and give them the information. And the reason is, the federal government's attitude is, or it better remain this, is once you have information in your hands, you don't have the option to do nothing.
Right.
You don't. You have to act on it. Nancy's aware of a matter when she came in with the Isaac Walton League a number of years ago, and we all went, this is a real problem. And sure enough, it ended up in a federal action. And Isaac Walton League was really, it's a great organization too, but they realized they couldn't bring a piece of litigation. So that's really what I wanted to stress. And I wanted to thank you guys for your work. And I'll keep funneling people to you and doing whatever I can to help. So thanks.
Thank you, Mark.
Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Sure.
And we have a great, Dean and I have built a great relationship with EPA enforcement, both their civil enforcement staff and their criminal enforcement. EPA has a lot of people maybe don't know, EPA has a criminal investigation division, a law enforcement division of investigators who, if you have good information about what you think might be, criminal polluting activity, they will talk to you. They will come out and investigate. And they have pursued some of our reports and things that, you know, it was hard for us to pursue, and it led to real action. So, you know, EPA is, again, if you can bring them good evidence, they're a good ally. Sometimes we take their place, just like with the state. You know, EPA's budget has been cut, and the states in our watershed, their budgets are probably even in worse shape. I mean, the states they don't have a lot of political will to take enforcement action, unfortunately, in our region, and they certainly don't have the budget, which are things we try to work on. You know, we can work on the budget, we can't work on the political will, but that's you know, anyway, EPA has been a good ally.
Yeah.
So thank you, Mark.
No, thanks. And those connections are great. They're phenomenal. So when Dean and Phillip come in with a load of information, they will always receive a very receptive audience at EPA. Not that it'll prompt action all the time. I'm not going to promise that.
No.
That's
Not
true.
always.
That's true.
Not always, and it's extremely frustrating. But those connections are good. Thanks.
Sure.
Thanks, Mark. So someone just asked a question, will this presentation be available to view later? Yes, it will be. I will send it around to everyone through their email, either today or maybe tomorrow. And it'll be on our YouTube page on our website. So you can send it around to your friends or anyone else. Sorry. All right. So yeah, so I think we're gonna end it there. Dean and Phillip, you guys got anything last to say before we end it?
Just thank you for attending today and joining today, and you know, get involved with our work. We do great serious work like this, and we also have a lot of fun events and interesting things going on in our watershed. So check us out and get involved with us.
Yeah, we've worked really hard to get people involved in a variety of different ways and create pathways into our organization so people can get involved, like cleanups and water quality monitoring and, you know, rapid response training. So if you're interested, just please let us know. We'd love to get you more involved in the work we do, but we appreciate all the support.
All right, thanks everyone. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks,
There you
everyone.
go.
All right.
Have a great 4th of July.
Happy holiday, everyone.
Bye
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.